Welcome to another episode of the Disruptive Dialogue. My name is Thomas Cotton. I'm the founder and CEO of Redemption and Advancement Alliance, but I'm also the host of Disruptive Dialogue. Today, I got again with me my friend, my brother, like no other, Michael Upshaw. Michael, what's going on, brother?
All is well, man. All is well. I won't have all those ands and M's and everything like I did last week.
Well, we're having a conversation. We're continuing our conversation from last week when we were talking about winning momentum. We're finishing up mending brokenness, but we want to talk about winning momentum. And a part of that winning momentum is mending brokenness. Like, there's brokenness in our life. There's things that have caused us harm in our life. There's things that have caused us to just be frustrated with life and feel like we can't get ahead. Like, every time I take a step forward, take two steps back. But sometimes that's because we anchor ourselves to the past and we keep the past in our present and we allow it to lead us in our future. So we're going to create this winning momentum. Somehow we got to let go of some of the things in the past in order to improve who we are and make sure we can get to the places and the spaces we want to be. So we're going to talk about that winning momentum today. And we're going to start off talking about forgiveness, because forgiveness is one of those things that anchor us to our past. It's something that we hold on to so long that we never let it go, and it continues to eat away at us. And so winning momentum is something that cannot be created when you're holding on to your past and you're letting your past dictate to you now and your future. There's one thing about our past: we can't change it. It is what it is. So some of the ways we overcome the barriers or the hurts and the harms that have happened to us is learning to forgive. And before I let Michael jump in, I want to just say this. I heard this a long time ago. Unforgiveness is like you drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. It's not going to happen. It's just killing you. So, Michael, when it comes to unforgiveness in life and things that we must forgive, has that ever been a challenge for you?
Thomas, the answer is yes. In fact, I'm going to ask for your forgiveness because I'm going to take a selfie pause. And, because this is, selfie pause, man. There we go.
All right. We got this. Hey, we working it.
I'm going to post that to social media. So, man, they probably like, how can you be so lighthearted?
Let me just say this, because Michael is my marketing and media guy, or media and marketing. Can't remember which way it goes. It's one of those. And so he's always making sure that we get this stuff out there. I appreciate him. If you're ever in need of someone who could do media and marketing, you want to look him up at abovethecloud.com. We are abovethecloud.com. We are abovethecloud.com. I'll put that out there, but go ahead, Michael.
There you go. We are abovethecloud.com. And we just took a selfie forgiveness pause. So do I have your forgiveness?
Yes.
All absolutely. Right. There you go. Forgiveness is, so the question was, have I ever been in a situation where I had to forgive? Yeah, all the time. And probably even more than that is being in a position where you have to be forgiven. And then being in a position where you have to learn to forgive yourself. So there's different levels to this thing. But I will say that one of the most difficult things for me that I had to forgive was something that really challenged me as a believer. It was a very devastating, thing for me. And I remember I was actually struggling with forgiveness, and I was in a church service, and it just so happened that that particular Sunday, the pastor was preaching on unforgiveness. And I remember not wanting to move out of my seat when the call came that if you were struggling with unforgiveness, let us pray for you, that whole thing. And I was actually visiting this church. It happened to be here in the metro Atlanta area. I didn't live in Atlanta at the time. I actually lived in North Carolina. And so my wife and I were visiting, and man, that was a difficult day. But I had carried this unforgiveness probably up at that point, probably about 25 years of my life. And it was a really hard thing. But once I got past that and was able to forgive the person, and really start to live my life from a perspective that was different, it helped me to really learn how to process when it comes to people doing things to you, that you may not like. And there are things in life, man, that sometimes, we will struggle with, because it's like, man, I've heard people say, I'll never forgive that. I'll never forgive this. I'll never forgive you for that. And that's where I was. I was in a place where it was like, I will never, no matter what. I tell you how bad it was for me. Honestly, my wife can attest to this. I knew what the Bible said about unforgiveness. I knew that it said that, if you're not, willing to forgive, then you can't receive forgiveness. And to not be able to receive forgiveness from the Lord means that, man, you basically condemning yourself to hell. I mean, you like, all your sins are on you, basically. I was actually, in my mind, that's where I was. I had accepted the fact that what this person did to me was worth me not being forgiven by God.
Wow.
Literally. I won't go into the details, and maybe we'll talk about it on another podcast episode. So, they call that a cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger.
So if you're interested, for those that know me, kind of know my story a little bit and kind of know a little bit about, that. But I had made up my mind, man. In fact, it was interesting because the person who had did me dirty, I had literally made a pact with someone else what we were going to do to that person. But there were some things that kind of tied around that. And it had to do with, my grandmother. And so, like I said, we'll talk about it on another podcast without jumping into all the details. But I can tell you that somebody out there today, you may be struggling with unforgiveness. But I could tell you, the moment that I broke down and said, you know what, man, I'm going to let this person go. I'm going to forgive what it is that they did. It was the day that I literally got free. So to Thomas's point, because I love the quote that you made, right? It's like drinking poison and expecting somebody else to die. The idea is that you're drinking the poison every single day that you walk with unforgiveness. And that's what I was doing, so much so that I had poisoned my own mind to think that it was worth me not being forgiven by God to not forgive this other person, which then puts you in a whole nother level of what seat do you actually think you sit in? What power do you think you actually possess? And so because typically forgiveness comes from a place of where we feel like we have the power in ourselves to hold on to this thing because of what it's going to do to somebody else, when all the while it's really not doing anything to them. It's doing something to us. So that was a 5-minute answer to a 2-second question.
It's all good. It's interesting. We talk about my story all the time. My story is rooted in unforgiveness. Like the whole disruptive part of my life in the beginning, I was willing to lose my life. I was willing to let my life just be, taken over. I felt like there was only a few things that can happen to me. I'll be dead, I'll be in prison, or something else crazy was going to happen. But I never felt like I could ever make it because I had a lot of hurt. I
Mm,
talk about how, at the age of 14, I basically started making all my decisions on my own. My dad, he was stabbed, and he never recovered from that the way he was before. And so there was a lot of different things that I had to adjust to then. I lived with my dad at that time. My mom lived in Las Vegas, and she wanted me to come live with her. And she had already set up my whole world here with her to come live with her. But the timing of her asking me to come live with her was wrong. So she was hurt when I told her I wasn't going to come live with her at that time, and she disowned me. I'm 14 years old, like just turned 14. It was during my birthday that I got my mom disowned me. 2 weeks before my birthday was when my dad got stabbed. So at that point, I have to start making decisions on my own. And, when your whole world just shifts the way
mm.
mine did at that time, a lot of hardship, a lot of frustrations, getting clowned a lot, all kinds of stuff. Is it just really worked on my mindset and made me angry. And I just kept getting angrier and angrier. I know a lot of people that know me back then. If you were near me all the time, you could see it. But there's a lot of times, people they saw the best of me, and I appreciate those people. But for a while, I was willing to lose my life because my primary relationships harmed me so much and exposed me to so many different other things that can hurt my life. And so forgiveness was a big part of allowing myself to grow and create that winning momentum. So basically, I started to recognize that my dad did the best he could. My mom was doing the best they could. The thing that I understood at that point was when they brought me into this world, it wasn't that they brought me into this world to hurt me, but they had some mess going on in their life. They just brought me into that mess. And so having that mess, it's like we can't control the mess we bring our kids into sometimes. If our life is what it is when a child is conceived, then that's just the way it's going to be. Right. So I began to understand, change my perspective about what they did. And it wasn't being done to me. It was just, and it wasn't because of me that all these things were happening. It was just what life had dealt to them. And I go through this idea of understanding. One of the things that I understood was my mom, who's Korean, and my dad's black. There's a reason why I have not met anybody from my mom's family ever. There's a reason because
So
my
wait a
mom's
second.
having, yeah,
So you like African, Korean, American, black.
kind of like that. Yep. Um, and so my mom, she has a family, and I'm assuming that her family never wanted to see me. My
Mm.
mom had to make a choice. She's having a half black child. Koreans aren't like the most friendly. Let me back up. I know a lot of Korean people who've been great in my life, but I also have met some that are extra prejudiced, extra against. I remember my birthday when I was turning 22, went to Morro Bay, Pismo Beach area. I go in to buy a Snapple, and I bring the Snapple up to the counter, and this lady's behind the counter. I'm like, "Oh, you're Korean?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm Korean." I said, "Yeah, I'm half Korean also." She said, "Yeah, half." That's the kind of madness I had to grow up with. But anyways, beginning to understand that my mom was disowning herself. How many times have we said to others, like, I'm not going to pull this weapon out to harm anybody else. But when you get hurt, you just don't know what kind of weapons you're going to pull out. And so I think that's one of the things my mom did. But I also started thinking, like, I'm no better than her, because if I would have had a child during that time that I was in my madness and in my craziness, I would have been like, yeah, that ain't my child or something else, because that's just kind of the culture that I had in my mind at that time. So a
Mm.
lot of times when we try to understand others rather than be understood, we can begin to see that the harm that they caused to us was because of some other harm that was caused to them. So it doesn't justify what they done, but it helps us to understand ways to forgive. So I just want to share a little bit about my story, because forgiveness, without that, I would still be anchored into the same anger and madness and craziness that happened, 40 years ago.
So let's dive in on that real
Yeah.
quick, because let's talk about that. Like, you hit some very high points. I think I shared with you during the last podcast. I can't remember how deep we got into it, but I was saying you and I have some similarities, things in common, as we all do. My mother also stabbed my father.
Mm.
The interesting dynamic of that, though, they didn't split up after the fact. I didn't even see it happen. But I'm laughing because it was a crazy story. My dad used to drink, so he suffered from addiction. He was alcohol, drugs, that whole thing. But he was functional. He worked every day and did all of those things, right? But when I was really, really little, I guess maybe infant age, I've always heard this story, and I know it to be true. My mother, who has passed away, and my father, who has also passed away. But my dad, I guess, I came home and they, got into an argument and whatever, and there was some scissors sitting on the table, and so my mother grabbed the scissors, and my dad dared her to stab him, and so she did. She stabbed him in the leg. My mother was a nurse, by the way, but she didn't take him to the hospital or anything like that. Somebody else had to come and take him. I say that to say that when you talk about growing up in an environment, right, that is volatile, things are happening. It begins to shape your mind around, as you made a very, I think, good point. The things that happen to us as kids were adults that were making decisions about their own lives, not necessarily thinking about the impact that it had on our lives, right?
Right.
And so when we think about those things as now we are adults, now we're parents, right? We probably are not as unscrupulous, if you will, as some of the things that we may have seen and not understood, because we want to be very intentional about how we raise our kids in the presentation, right? We probably monitor what they watch on TV, right? We probably, say, hey, no, you can't watch this, or, you got to think about these things. For the most part, my brother and I grew up with no boundaries as it related to those things, right? So when we think about what shapes our mind or what influences us, we talking about things that happen on TV, right? You and I are talking about things, and there are things that I did see, right? There are things that I did witness. So in your case, you was 14 years old and you was faced with a decision as a 14-year-old child to say, and notice I didn't say a 14-year-old young man. I said a 14-year-old child. As a 14-year-old child, you was put in a decision was put in front of you to make without really, having all the tools and the mechanics to know that you would be disowned, and what that meant as a child to say, hey, because oftentimes we hear about the father that walks away, but we don't hear about the mother that walks away, right? So go a little bit deeper into that, being, at that point in time at 14 years old, being with your dad. We always hear the story about, boys need, men in their lives and their fathers in their lives and that kind of thing. And so clearly you had that at that point of a decision, but talk about what that separation did, both spiritually, emotionally, mentally, in that capacity.
Yeah, I don't think there was any spiritual capacity at that point.
Like, that you were aware of.
Yeah,
right?
I was aware of. I was fully engaged in just the idea that I have freedom. I have freedom to do, and no one telling me what to do. But at the same time, having to fend for myself made me upset, made me angry. It's like, how are you going to leave me at one of the most vulnerable times of my life? I was just getting ready to go into high school, and I didn't have, this structure around me. I felt like I was still getting to know my family at the time and what I can depend on them for and what I couldn't, because my first 6 years of my life, I lived with my mom. Didn't know I had my family with my dad. My mom had to move to Vegas because she just couldn't care for me anymore. So the opportunity that she had was in Vegas, but she couldn't afford to take care of me. So one day she introduces me to my dad's family. Not long after that, I'm living with my dad's family, living with my aunt. And then, soon I'm with my dad and with this step family, right? And it's all these adjustments that, kids are very resilient when it comes to things like that. And so the resiliency was there, but the way of shifting the mind and life and everything else was kind of interesting. So at the time that this happens, my dad, like yours, was an alcoholic, and I don't say these things to knock who they are. This is who they are. And I've
It's a
learned
fact. Yeah.
I learned a
Look,
long time ago to accept them, to love them, to honor them, both, in
listen,
spite of.
one of the things that my dad used to say was this. He used to say, accept me for who I am and leave me the hell alone. So when I tell his story, that's what I hear in the back of my mind.
Right. Yeah.
This is who I was, man. So absolutely. To
Yep.
your point, it's not to discredit. I love my father with everything I had, man. So
yeah. Yeah, we don't, all this is just conversation. It's literally what happened, and that's what the disruptive dialogue is all about. We got to talk about things that have actually happened in our life. We got to talk about them in a way that's true and honest, not the way we romanticize stuff. Because that's the problem a lot of times. If we're going to create winning momentum, we can't romanticize the past. We know what the truth about the past is. We have to begin to tell it like it is, tell it like a TI is, and then go on and move forward. And it doesn't discredit somebody. It doesn't put them down. It just allows us to see what was wrong and what we can change. That's one of the things that when you're disrupting a cycle, you're looking at what is wrong and what needs to change. And so when I talk about my childhood and everything else, this was what was wrong, and I didn't know how to change it.
Yeah.
I was getting angry. I was getting frustrated. I wanted more. I wanted to just be supported. I wanted to be able to play high school sports, but as an adolescent, I'm making terrible decisions, and there's no one to hold me accountable, keep me, moving forward. So when I make all these terrible decisions and I decide this is what I'm going to do, and I'm making these terrible decisions one after another, I don't graduate from high school on time. I have an opportunity to go to summer school and graduate on time, but guess what? It's the summertime. So I'm out there sitting back and unwinding and having a ball, thinking that I'm just going to have to pass a test and I'm going to, pass summer school. But he switched it up on me. He was like, nah, it ain't all about just passing the test. You're going to have to get in here and you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to do the work. And I didn't know it. So I don't graduate on time. August 17th, 1990, I had a date to go to the military, to the Navy. I was already accepted everything. Because I didn't graduate on time, I missed that. So a lot of the opportunities that I missed, the frustration was pointed at other people instead of me taking full responsibility for creating this winning momentum. I had the opportunities, but when stuff is hard, you ain't, it's like I'm trying to look for some relief here and there.
Yeah.
And as a teen, as an adolescent, man, that mess was hard. And so, but this is the challenge to a lot of people. How many things did we learn in adolescence that we still brought into adulthood and never challenged it?
Yeah.
If I take that same mentality that I had as a teen, as an adolescent into my adulthood, then I never overcome some of the boundaries and the barriers that I face. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of us need to begin to look at is how many things have we allowed into our life without challenge?
Yeah.
Because it's comfortable, because it feels safe, or, I'm afraid if I let this go, then, something ain't going to work out right. It's kind of like the dude that holds onto his jerry curl a little bit too long.
Man, somebody out there watching Jerry curl, they just canceled us.
Yeah.
Right? So this is cancel culture, right? You talk about Jerry curls and, and let me stop before I go too far for real.
Right.
But I used to have a Jerry curl, man. I used to rock it. My godmother was a beautician, man. So, it's like, hey, most people got haircuts. I got Jerry curls. But funny thing, man, I have two fathers, right? I always tell the story. normally when you hear me talk, most people, because they'll hear me talk, somebody might hear what I said, and then later on hear me and say, well, I heard you talking about your dad on a podcast, and you're saying this. But my other father who raised me, he gave me a lot of tools that I didn't even realize I was getting because I was so hurt from so many other things. I had a chip on my shoulder. I was angry about anything. And you talked about going to the Navy. I went into the Marine Corps. I remember when I was getting ready to leave, and my dad doesn't even remember this. He said, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. And I said, I was like, okay, why is that? Says, because you have a problem with authority. And I remember, man, going into the Marine Corps. And I remember that conversation with my dad. As quick as it was, I had determined in my mind that I was not going to allow anything to get in between me and graduating from the Marine Corps. I had already had a lot of other challenges that, almost kept me from going. I got kicked out of school, and, that wasn't a good thing. And we'll talk about that on another podcast.
Cliffhanger.
And so, right. And so, but the interesting thing about that conversation was I got challenged in boot camp by one of my drill instructors. And that challenge was the thing that almost made me walk away. And I went to boot camp. Was a best friend at the time. Now I can't even call him an associate, but that's another podcast. So we were stacking them up, man, winning momentum. But the interesting thing was, I remember the day that the drill instructor came over to me, and we were in formation, and something happened. He got in my face, and when he got in my face, he called me the B word. And that moment, everything in me was ready to fight, which is a death sentence in boot camp in the Marine Corps. Because if you swing on a drill instructor, I promise you, like hornets, you're going to have them all over you. But in my mind, I didn't care, right? I knew I at least had one guy that was going to fight with me. But it would have been a fight that we wasn't going to win, right? But I remember he called me that, man, and literally I dropped my weapon. And one of the things in the military is that you keep both hands on your weapons at all times, right? Because we in formation, we marching. And so to the point I made about spiritual, but we don't always understand it, because I had no spiritual sense, common sense, or sense of God really at all. I knew who he was because of my family and I had ministers in my family, and people went to church. But I really didn't have a relationship myself. So when this happened, I was like, hey, and the other drill instructor saw it on my face. He came over and pulled me out of formation, and he walked over to me, or walked me over to where he was, and he gave me my weapon, and he said, it's not worth it. He said, you're gonna and I'm telling you, this doesn't happen, man. Like, he said, don't let him cost you earning the title of Marine. And I was hearing him, but I'm fuming at the same time. And he began to talk to me, and some of the things registered, some didn't. But what stuck was this guy, who I've seen people get kicked out, like boot camp, man. It's easy. This guy took time, pulled me out of formation outside of everybody else, and made sure that he said these things to me. Why is that important? Because had it not been for him, I would have probably made a dumb decision, because I'm coming from the east side of Detroit. I'm thinking how hood I am. You ain't gonna call me this and not have to deal with it. And this guy sees that and says, nah, he pulls me to the side. I've seen people get in trouble for less and not make it and graduate boot camp. And so when he pulled me out to the side, I realized, okay, this is the moment that my dad said, I'll see you in 2 weeks. So I got to make a decision, because it's like this guy is saying to me, don't prove your dad right, because the next thing you do is going to determine whether or not you're going to graduate or you're going to go home and it's a difference. And so I got back in formation. I marched, did whatever it was we was doing that day, and I made up my mind that I'm gonna graduate. So
It's interesting about what you're saying too. It kind of goes back to our conversation last week where there's these moments in life where you can create winning momentum or kill it because you're
man,
still angry. You're listening to this dude, but you still got in your mind Detroit.
yep,
You ain't gonna call me out my name,
yeah.
and you have a choice.
And
Like
look,
you could plot. I know for me, in those moments back in the days, I plotted stuff. I didn't go into the I'm gonna let this go kind of mentality. I was like, all right, I got something for you.
and man, look,
And yeah,
here's a key part of that story. Almost 6 years later, I'm selling cars in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Now, I'm gonna back up just a little bit. The same drill instructor that called me the name about 3 years into my Marine Corps career committed suicide.
wow.
So I could have let somebody who didn't value their own life cost me where I was going, right? Number one. Number two, 6 years after all of this, and I'm out of the Marine Corps, I'm in Jacksonville, North Carolina, I'm selling cars. The same drill instructor who at that point had retired out of the Marine Corps happened to be walking up on the lot. I see him, I go over to him, I introduce myself. I say, look, I know you've seen a lot of recruits and a lot of Marines in your lifetime, and you probably don't remember me, but I want to say thank you because that day that you pulled me to the side helped me to get to where I am today. Because had you not done that, I don't know where I would have been, where I would have landed. So you don't always get those opportunities. But to the point, I had to forgive the dude who committed this, what I felt like was a, evil, wicked act against me, right? So that I can move on from it. But I had help in that journey of somebody who cared enough to say, hey, man, not you.
It's interesting also. And I want to say this is creating winning momentum. The forgiveness aspect of it, the listening to a stranger, so to speak. He's another drill instructor, but he's a stranger at this time. And the acknowledgement that I can't do this by myself. You're going to have to listen to other people if you're going to create winning momentum. And I've learned that from my life. I didn't, it's not like I built this great empire or whatever, but a lot of the things I've been able to do, it's not because I'm so great at something. It's because I listen well to people.
Yeah.
People will tell you the ways to create winning momentum in your life. It's just, are you willing to listen? Or you discredit them? Or do you make it seem like it's too hard? I tell people a lot of times, we think to problems, we don't think to solutions. So when the problems get hard, we stop at the problem when there's still a solution there. A lot of times we don't know how to solve those problems ourselves, but someone else does. So we have to allow the people in our lives, whether that's, you find a trusted companion or a trusted friend,
Yeah.
if it's therapy, if it's a pastor, or if it's somebody, you need to find someone that can help you, but you also have to listen. You have to be willing to be disciplined and change your perspective about it. So I'm going to give you a few steps about forgiving yourself, and then we'll kind of move into a little bit more about winning momentum, and then we'll close out because we only got a few minutes left. But sometimes we just got to accept our humanity.
Let me interject this real quick.
Go ahead.
I'm watching the podcast, man, and it's good. I just want y'all to know this is a good podcast, the Disruptive Dialogue. You want to make sure that you watch it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Man, I'm telling you, stay connected each week because there's more and more content coming your way. But I'm gonna get back to watching the podcast.
I appreciate that. Like, dude, you always right on time. See, for me, I don't think about stuff like that. That's why I need Michael around, because Michael, that's his mindset. And so again, if you need anything to do with marketing and media and marketing, go to www.weareabovethecloud.com. Michael Upshaw, CEO of Above the Cloud, is our guest today on the Disruptive Dialogue. He actually is a hijack host kind of sense, because we always have this dialogue anyways. And so one of the things before we get more into winning momentum, there's a couple things we have to let go of. This is addition by subtraction. And so forgiveness, right? We have to forgive, and then we have to allow other people to tell us certain things, but we also have to accept our humanity. Listen, things hurt. Things mess up our minds. They cause us to be frustrated. We make mistakes. Man, I made decisions that led me to prison twice. Like I didn't really have a real idea of how important my life was back then.
Mm.
But being able to accept my humanity, that I made some bad decisions, and allow other people to sow into my life so that I could make better decisions, that was important. And then we have to acknowledge and confront, not just acknowledge that we have emotions, but confront our emotions. We have to really challenge ourselves that, are we going to allow emotions to dictate our every decision? Or is there a point where we can start putting 1+1 = 2 together in our life, right? And so we also have to begin to practice that same forgiveness for ourselves. We got to learn from our mistakes. And so these are a part of creating winning momentum when it comes to the things that you must let go. Again, the addition by subtraction kind of thing. And so as we continue to walk through creating winning momentum, there's some things that we also have to do. We have to begin to structure our life in a certain way. So we want to talk about a little bit before we finish strategically improving your life. But before I do want to acknowledge one thing. We wouldn't be having this mending brokenness conversation without my cousin Sabrina and her book, Mending Brokenness. And so Sabrina wrote this book. It's an amazing quick read book. And there's so many little tidbits in this book that you can learn from. And I hope that everybody gets a chance to go out and purchase a copy of this book. You can find it on Amazon, and I'm putting the link right here in the chat. But it's also going to be on the screen. You can go to Amazon and just search "Mending Brokenness," and you can find the book there. Go out and purchase a copy. And I'm not just trying to say this because it's my cousin, but this is a really good book about authentic wholeness, because we don't want to just have, you know, brokenness that continues to disrupt our life. We want to have disruptors to the brokenness in our life. We don't want to just keep the brokenness up front. So go out and purchase that book on Amazon. You can find it searching "Mending Brokenness." The link is in the chat. And so hopefully you all go out and purchase a copy. But one of the things about mending brokenness, forgiveness, we talked a lot of weeks about mending brokenness, but we need to talk about this winning momentum. So strategically improving yourself. Michael, you're a CEO of a company. This is not the first company that you were president or CEO of. You've done a lot of good things. You're one of the best salesmen I know, not just because you sell stuff, but because you know how to engage people. You connect with people. You're a pastor, you're a husband first, you're a father, you're a granddad now. Tell us about that, strategically improving yourself, because dude, you're from Detroit. Ain't nothing good coming out of Detroit.
Well, the Lions are definitely proof of that. That's why I'm an Atlanta Falcons fan, and I guess either way, I'm losing. So, but no, man, that's actually an excellent question. But it goes back to forgiveness. Literally, man, learning to let go of things has been the catalyst for my journey. I've watched and I've listened, to different people in life. We have mentors and all of these different things. But at the end of the day, my walk with Christ solidified my relationship with others. I wouldn't be the father that I am. I wouldn't be the husband that I am. I wouldn't be the friend that I am. Right. One of the things that made me a better friend was Jonathan Young. We go back and we had a very candid conversation. I used to be real selfish, man. And he just brought it to my attention one day and was like, man, and so that helped me. And real relationships help you grow. Right. And so that made me a better CEO. How I know is because later on, he would come and work for me. And had I not changed, he would have never wanted to work for me. And so I'm blessed to be privileged, man, to have friends who are brothers who love me enough to tell me when I get it wrong. Right. And so, but that's part of it, man, and I to be at a level in life where you're at peace with who you are, you're comfortable, Your journey is your journey. And that's okay. But how you navigate through life and the decisions and the choices that you make to become a better human, man, it for me, it comes through my relationship with Christ. That's the foundation.
Man,
Oftentimes, go ahead.
nah, I was just say I agree with that. You know, I know a lot of people know my story, and people don't know the transformative part of my story. It's like one of those things, and it's on another recording. I'll put it out on the YouTube page for the Disruptive Dialogue and our Facebook page, so you'll be able to see that recording about me telling my story. But out of the blue, like Christ touched my life. I was a Jesus hater. It was a white God, blonde hair, blue eyed devil. That's what I used to think.
That's what I
And,
was.
and then the moment that transformed my life, transformed me forever. But there's still work that has to be done at that point. And what you said about how your friend told you about yourself and you listen. Sometimes you got to listen to what people just say off the wall. Because for me, my cousin made an off the wall comment. He said, "Man, if you weren't my cousin, I'd even hate you." And
Wow.
so a part of strategically moving forward and advancing your life with winning momentum is being able to take self-reflection. I could have took what he said and been offended, but I started to reflect like, why would he say this to me? If my cousin, I'd even hate you. And man, I started checking myself and looking at different things, and I had some shady ways. You know, there were some shady things about me. And I had to begin to change. And a lot of times, what we do is we think that the change is going to happen immediately.
Yeah.
Changes don't happen immediately. They take work. They take time. You have to progress. You have to have clear goals.
Yeah.
So that's a part of this growth mindset that we have to have. You know, if we develop a growth mindset that, look, I'm going to still make some mistakes because I created a lot of bad habits when I was a kid. I created a lot of bad habits as a young adult. I created a lot of bad thinking errors, thinking I knew stuff. And as I grew and kept living, I started realizing, man, you didn't know nothing. And so there's a lot of different things that we got to do if we're going to strategically improve and create this winning momentum. Self-reflection is one of those big things.
Yeah, it's huge, man. And to your point, I mean, you got to thank God for people like your cousin, right? You got to thank
Right.
God for folks like Jonathan. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, some people just leave you, right? They'll just leave you out there like, man, all right, hey, but it's something, man, not only for somebody to say it, but for us to receive it.
Right.
Right. Like you said, you can immediately just reject, oh man, you just been, whatever, all right, whatever. But um, there are times in your life, man, that you have to reflect and be like, man, no, I'm just not being a good person. Right. And it's a lot of people today that if they're honest with themselves, if they're watching, they hadn't been a good person. Right. They haven't treated everybody the way that they should be. But yet we often expect people to, forgive us. We often expect people to treat us a certain way. Right. One of the things that I'll say, and I'll get ready to shut it down and close it on my side on this. It's interesting that sometimes we can talk about people and how they treat others, only for us to turn around and treat others the same way and not see a problem with it. Right. And it's like we can make fun of people. Somebody make fun of us for who we are, our race, or different things like that. But then we'll turn around and do the same thing to another race and then laugh at it, right? How they talk, their dialogue, wherever they from, that kind of thing. And somebody said about us, and then we get upset, we get offended, right? The point that I'm making is we're all people with feelings who live in this world, and we have to learn how to not only ask for forgiveness, but to give, and then also to receive what's coming to us, but treat each other with the dignity and the respect that we all deserve from each other, regardless of our background, regardless of where we're from.
Right.
Regardless of those things that we often use to separate us, right? The them and us mentality, right? I'm not going to let them hold me back because I don't believe that them can, because I'm not giving them that much power in my life, because Christ is the one who orders my steps, right? And so it don't mean that we don't have challenges and adversities and things that we have to face, but that's life. And so the point that I'm making is when it comes to mending brokenness and winning momentum, we can't make excuses. We can't treat other people the way that we've been treated. And we have to stand on principle that's going to move us forward and propel us into the place. So this is episode number 16. You might see episode number 15
Yeah,
up top.
15's up top. I
But
didn't change that. You didn't need to tell people. They weren't looking at that. They're looking at our face. Anyways, but the thing that you're saying too is it's us and them. No, it's us. Like, what are you doing for yourself to be better? I'll say this. One of the things that helped me create winning momentum in my life is everything that I learned in my past, I learned. Every little bit of crime, every little bit of whatever it was, I learned. And so I always told myself, if there's something else that I want to do, I have to learn it.
yeah,
And so if you want to create winning momentum, you got to surround yourself with people who are encouraging you to learn, encouraging you to step out in faith and do that thing that God has put in your heart that you want to do. But also you need to learn some things. If you don't know how to do what it is that you want to do, find a space and place that you can learn. Winning momentum is not something that's just going to happen to you. It's something you create. It's one step at a time. If you continue to take steps every day, if you take walks every day, before you know it, you're going to be walking much further. As your legs get stronger, you're going to want to run. As you start running every day, you're going to run much further as you keep going. It's a process. You got to create a process and trust that process, because we just don't fall into winning momentum, because brokenness wants to keep us in the place that we're at.
yes,
But your heart, your desire, your passion wants you to move forward. It wants you to create this winning momentum, and you know it's there, but you just don't know how to get there. And that's why you connect with people who can teach you the how. It's not all about what and why. We know the what's and whys of life. It's the how. So find a coach, find somebody who can help you create this winning momentum, because if there's a dream that you have and you don't live that dream out, it's just going to die with you. It's
Man,
not something that someone else can pick up, because they don't even know what your dream is. This is all about you and the passion you have for life. If you see a need, meet a need. I often say this. I hear people talk about young ladies and the way they dress. Ooh, they dress so provocative. They dress this, they dress that. But there's nothing out there to help these ladies see anything different. If you feel like the young ladies need to learn something different, create the platform, create the space so they can go and learn something different. I'm using that just as an example. I'm not saying that's the way it is, but that's an example. If you see a need, meet a need. If you can meet that need, live your dreams, live your passion, create that winning momentum, learn what it is that you need to move forward. Do not let the brokenness of your past hold you back. Unanchor yourself by forgiving your past, by forgiving yourself, and then move yourself forward, create that winning momentum. Disrupt the dialogue that's going in your head that you can't, that you won't, that is too hard. You got to disrupt that dialogue and continue to create brand new words for yourself, words that will speak life. Speak the word of God into your life. Let other people speak positivity into your life. And if anyone ever tells you that your dream is too big for you, that's probably not the person you need around you speaking into your life. So, as Michael said, this is episode 16 of the Disruptive Dialogue. So grateful that Michael joined us for this live conversation, because we got to create this winning momentum, not only within ourselves, but within our communities and within so many people. So if you don't know about the work that I do through Redemption and Advancement Alliance, check out www.redeem-advance.org. Make sure you like and share this podcast. Become a follower of this podcast. Support the work that we're doing. Share this information, because it's going to have to get out there. We're going to have plenty of conversations with people who are disrupting the cycles of incarceration, of poverty, of different things that plague our communities. And we want to have these conversations because we need to move forward together. If one moves forward and goes by himself and leaves everybody behind, that sucks. But all of us have the power to continue to move things forward. So again, make sure you like and share. Join us here every week as we broadcast the Disruptive Dialogue. Appreciate you all for tuning in. Have a great day.